Hi, everyone. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to pop on because it's just 1:30 now. So if you need to take a few minutes to get some water, or if you're like me and you have some tea, feel free. So we're just going to wait, give everyone a few minutes before we begin. Hi, Jessica. How are you? And so while we're waiting, I'm just give people a couple minutes to pop in. I'd love to know, how is everyone feeling today? I know I had to take like a quick mid-morning nap. My toddler, his sleep schedule's been a little all over the place lately, so I had to take a nap this morning. I was a little tired, so I love to know how everyone's feeling, how you're doing. Cozy despite the weather. Yeah. What's the weather like where you are, Jessica? I know here it just started to get not hot. I mean, it's not cold yet here. It's in the 60s. So, and if you might be able to see me, what I'm doing, I'm shuffling some cards because I thought it'd be nice to pull a card before we begin. Nice. That's nice, cozy weather. I have got my Spirit Cats Oracle deck, and I'm just shuffling the cards. I'm going to pull one for our time together today. Okay, so this is the card I pulled from the deck, and I know it's backwards for you, but it's the focus card, and it says, "Meet Artemis." Finding the camera is tricky. She is the master hunter. She can focus her attention like a laser beam. She has crystal clear vision and razor sharp hearing. She observes everything, knows how to be invisible, and leaps out at the perfect moment. We often have a zillion ideas floating in our minds. We are multitasking machines. When Artemis shows up, it's time to pick one thing, to hone in and quell distractions. How will we ever catch that mouse if we don't focus on it, letting everything else fade into the background for the moment? And I think this is the perfect card because we're going to be talking about Mercury retrograde today. And Mercury is all about the mind, how we think, how we speak and communicate. And focus is the perfect theme going into Mercury retrograde, and to focus in on one area. And I think as we go through the slides today and we go through each zodiac sign, you will find the perfect area for you to focus on. So this is perfect card. And so how this is going to go is I'm going to share my screen with you and go through some slides, but I have another screen over here so I can still see the chat. So if you have any questions as I'm going through the slides, feel free to enter them into the chat box. And if you don't know where the chat box is, if you look at your screen, it's the bottom right-hand corner where it says say something nice. It doesn't have to be something nice. But that is where you can say what you would like. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so this is our webinar today, and it's Mercury retrograde magic, and we're going to dive into what I think is the magic behind Mercury retrograde, because so many of the messages we get around Mercury retrograde is that of fear and how we should almost constrict and be afraid, and all these things we have to watch out for, and all these things we can't do or shouldn't do. And I feel like that's misleading. I feel like that's just looking at one piece of what Mercury retrograde is, because we'll get into this as we go through, but all the planets except for 2 of them have retrograde periods, but none of them have such a bad rap like Mercury retrograde does. And so I feel like part of my mission is to change that and reframe how we look at this. And so I think all of you who are here today know who I am, but if you don't, hi, I am Sarah, and I am the owner and creator behind Bella de Luna. And my mission is to help folks find their own magic and power through planning with the moon and the seasons. So I began Bella de Luna back in 2012, if you can believe it, and it has grown and evolved over the years. I actually started out as a jewelry designer, but it's always had the same core message that each of us has our own inner magic that we can tap into. And so some of the big highlights over the past few years is I had a new moon subscription box called the Nova Luna box for a few years before my son was born. And then I published my first book, Lunar Intentions, in 2017. And then the Soul Care Planner was just released last month, which is super exciting. And so today, what we are going to look at is what retrogrades are, the general message behind Mercury retrograde, and then we're going to take a closer look at the Mercury retrograde messages for each zodiac sign. And let's be honest, I know that's why you're all here. It's okay. So now we're going to talk about what retrogrades are. And I will do my best to explain this. If you're like me in visual, it's maybe hard to get without a visual illustration, which I might have to do. If this doesn't make sense, I will bring out some visual props for you. But what is a retrograde? So, like I've mentioned, all the planets except for the sun and the moon have retrograde periods. This is why I say Mercury retrograde gets a really bad rap, because all the planets except for the sun and moon have this. And so retrograde means backwards. But the planets don't literally move backwards. There's a cat at my door. 1 second. I had a feeling that would happen if I closed my door, that a cat would want to be in here. So retrograde means backwards, but the planets don't actually move backwards. It's a trick of our brains and how our minds process information, that they just appear to be moving backwards because the planets are approaching their closest point while they're orbiting to Earth. And so it's like if you're sitting at a stoplight and the car next to you, who is also sitting still, suddenly takes off. Your brain interprets that movement as you are moving backwards, but you're sitting still. And so what's happening is the Earth is basically approaching another planet. So right now, the Earth is approaching Mercury. And as Earth pulls up alongside Mercury and starts to pull ahead, our brain has a hard time interpreting that motion of what's happening, because one planet is still and the other one is moving, because Earth is overtaking, is what I should say. So Earth's orbit is at a point where it's overtaking. It's not necessarily speeding up, but it seems to be speeding up based like next to Mercury, because orbits they're tricky. They aren't circles, they are an oval, and they're not quite exact. The orbits kind of wibble and wobble a little bit each year. And so when you have two planets getting close to each other and then one moves ahead because of just the way the orbits are lining up, it makes the other planet look like it's actually going backwards. So if you don't really care about the physics behind what a retrograde is, you don't need to worry about it. All you need to know is it's a trick our brains play on us, where the planet looks like it's moving backwards, but it's not actually moving backwards. And so in astrology, we take that moving backwards phenomenon and use it as a tool to look at the archetype of that planet and review it and kind of take it as a contemplative moment and review the archetype of that planet and how it plays out into our lives. I hope that makes sense. It's a tricky thing to explain through words. If you really want to go on YouTube and search, there are plenty of videos that should kind of give you a better illustration of this phenomenon. But the main thing is, it looks like it's moving backwards to our minds, but it's not actually moving backwards. And so again, all the planets except for the sun and the moon have a retrograde period. Mercury, because it's the closest to the sun, has this period happen more often. And so with Mercury, it's 3 or 4 times a year, about 3 weeks each time. So usually that means we have one, I think it's like late winter, and then in the summer, and then in the fall. Generally, very roughly speaking, if we're using the Northern Hemisphere seasons, that's generally where they happen. Venus happens every 18 months for 6 weeks. Mars is about every 2 years for 11 weeks. So you might have noticed a lot of talk lately about Mars retrograde, and that's because it's one of the ones that doesn't happen as often. Whereas you'll see as we get further down, it's Jupiter and Saturn. It's once a year for 4 months. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, again, it's once a year for 6 or 7 months. So you can see how long of a retrograde period some of these planets have. And again, it has to do with the orbit and how big the orbit is. And we feel Mercury, Venus, and Mars retrograde more deeply than the outer planets. Mercury, Venus, and Mars are all considered personal planets, so we feel them on a more personal, individual level, where Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all outer planets that affect us more on a global scale than a personal or individualized scale. And don't worry, you're all going to get these slides. So, because I know this is a lot of information in one slide, and this might be something you want to print out or write down. And so I'm going to make sure everyone gets these slides. And so now we're going to shift into the general Mercury retrograde messages. And if you have basically been on the internet in the past 5 years, you've probably seen these. You've probably heard them and seen articles about how you shouldn't travel during Mercury retrograde, or you always need to back up your computer. And these are there's 5 big areas where the themes of Mercury retrograde tend to pop up. And I've kind of broken these down into communication, contracts, travel, mental clarity, and technology. And the reason I've chosen these 5 areas is in astrology, Mercury governs our thoughts and our thought patterns, how we speak and communicate, how we process information. And it also has a lot to do with technology, the internet, travel. I mean, communication in itself, the way it travels, and also the way we travel and get our messages across. And so these are some of the big things that you've probably already have seen and are familiar with, that areas where issues can pop up during Mercury retrograde. And so for communication, you might notice things popping up with how you speak to yourself or how you speak to others. You may get caught gossiping or talking behind someone's back, or you may find that words you've said come back to, bite you, where you are suddenly finding that now that it applies to you, it's not as comfortable. And you also might find that there's more issues with getting your message across or finding the right words, where your messaging may be confusing or unclear. With contracts, the kind of rule of thumb I've always heard with Mercury retrograde is to not sign contracts when, it's Mercury retrograde. But we all have lives that we have to live, and we can't just stop living our lives. And sometimes there are things that have to get done, including signing contracts. And so the key there is just to keep an eye out on what could go wrong. So making sure you have all the information and that the other parties involved in the contract have all the information when you're signing the contracts. You want to make sure you read contracts carefully, that you double check them, you triple check them, you have other neutral third parties check them to make sure there's nothing misleading or incorrect in them. Travel, I know we've all heard the stories about traveling during Mercury retrograde, because delays and disruptions can pop up during this time, such as unpredictable weather or events or situations that can just change your travel plans. And the way I like to look at it is, if you are traveling where it's something you've planned out and thought out ahead of time prior to the Mercury retrograde happening, you're probably going to have less of an issue. Really, where issues pop up during Mercury retrograde when it comes to travel is when it's last minute travel or last minute travel plans. Mental clarity. A lot of people find during Mercury retrograde specifically that they have confusion around what direction to take, that things aren't as clear about where they're going or what they need to be doing, that they feel like they're missing important information, but they have no idea where to find it. And so it's just a good time, if you feel like that's popping up for you, to take a step back. And if you don't have to make a decision, if you can wait until after Mercury goes direct, that's a better time to make big decisions, because then hopefully you'll have more mental clarity. And then finally, technology. This is probably the one that gets talked about the most, and the whole backing up your computer and all of your electronic devices before Mercury retrograde begins. Because technology is so closely aligned to our communication and how we communicate, think like the internet and social media, that these things tend to pop up with Mercury retrograde. I know I have seen a lot of, for example, like Facebook and Twitter outages during Mercury retrograde. And you may have seen this neat little trick before, where the Mercury retrograde rule of thumb is to stick with words that begin with re. And these are generally, if you stick with the re words, those are good things to do during Mercury retrograde. So these are some examples: review, restore, redecorate, rewrite, return, renovate. Any of those RE words. It's just a good time overall with Mercury retrograde to take a step back, to pause, and to review, especially if you can take a look at where Mercury retrograde is happening for you in your birth chart, and then apply these rewords to that area of your chart, which we are going to get into more deep depth in a minute. But I want to talk first about the specifics of this upcoming retrograde cycle. So Mercury retrograde will begin on October 13th and will be retrograde until November 3rd. And this retrograde period is happening in the sign of Scorpio. So overall, that means this is a good time to clean out your psychic closet, the cobwebs in your brain. Talk therapy is going to be really beneficial across the board during this Mercury retrograde period, because Scorpio really likes to get deep and dig deep at the motivations behind our actions, and the why, and the root causes of our behavior. And so with Mercury retrograde happening in Scorpio, we can use that energy to review our past, to rethink our behavior and our habits and rework them. It's also a good time to review past hurts and conversations, because Scorpio, if you know anything about astrology, you might be aware that kind of the symbolism behind Scorpio, it has that tail. The scorpion has that tail that can lash out and sting. And so Scorpio can be really direct and straightforward with their words, where they can hurt other people by just kind of lashing out and stinging them with their words. With Mercury retrograde happening in Scorpio, that's giving us an opportunity to kind of turn that lens on ourselves and see where we've been hurt by past conversations and words that other people have said. And we can bring them up to the surface so we can deal with them, we can work with them, we can decide what we want to do with them. We can heal them, we can let them go, whatever feels good for us. And then because Mercury will be in Scorpio during this retrograde period, we're going to already be a little bit more prone to misunderstandings. And then with it being in Scorpio, it's really a good time to be honest about how you feel, because Scorpio can it feels very deeply, but it can try to want to hide those feelings out of a desire for self-preservation, which generally just harms us in the end. It doesn't actually help us in the long run. It just makes the journey to get to that end point a little bit longer. And so it's better to just be clear and upfront with how you're feeling instead of trying to hide or limit what you feel or keep yourself small. And so now we're going to get into the Mercury retrograde messages, specifically for this Mercury retrograde period from October 13th to November 3rd for each zodiac sign. So we're going to begin with Aries, and you can listen for your sun and your rising. They both might have messages for you. So just what I always tell people is take what resonates with you. And if it doesn't resonate, don't worry about it. So for Aries, this Mercury retrograde is going to be happening in your 8th house of transformation. And so your 8th house has to deal with how you merge resources with others, especially in your intimate relationships, how you share assets with others, how you share money, how you divide money. And you might want to use this Mercury retrograde period to reassess who owes you what and what you owe anyone else. So who owes you money? Who do you owe money to? What exchanges in general have happened or haven't quite been shored up yet, where things aren't balanced. It's also a good time to review your relationship with money and your beliefs about money, especially your inherited beliefs or money stories you were taught or learned as a child that you're still carrying with you. It's a good time to review those and decide what you want to do with those stories. Do you want to keep carrying those stories with you, or do you want to rework some of those stories and perhaps leave some of them behind and create or establish new stories? For Taurus, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 7th house of relationships, and that's pretty much what you might think it means. So this is a good time to reevaluate your relationships and the unspoken and spoken rules and agreements in them. You know, those sometimes you might have relationships where you haven't talked to your partner and said, okay, you take out the trash and I do the dishes. And it's just an unspoken rule. And now with Mercury retrograde happening in this area of your chart, you might have issues popping up where suddenly your partner is not doing the chore, the unspoken rule chore, and you feel like you're having to do more and you're starting to find yourself becoming more resentful or frustrated. So this is a time to speak up about these rules that may exist. You know, these exist in all our relationships where we just kind of adopt habits and routines, but we haven't actually spoken about them clearly with our partner. And so this is a good time to speak up and say, this is what I need. This is what I need from you. And this is what I'm going to do for you. And this is how we're going to divide these things, whatever they are. And so it's a good time to review if you're being honest about your needs and what you're able to give to others and what you need from others so you feel your best. And Gemini. So this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 6th house of work and health. And for Gemini, this means your work-life balance is definitely going to come up for review right now, especially if you've been burning the candle at both ends. And because you're Gemini, you probably have been, because Gemini is one of the two signs that is ruled by Mercury. And so the other one being Virgo. And so Gemini and Virgos generally feel Mercury retrogrades pretty deeply. And so health issues may come up for you, Gemini, that require your attention or really ask you to slow down and pay attention to the messages you're receiving in your body, because this is a really good time to focus on restoring yourself through really deep self-care and giving yourself time to rest, which I know is hard, but when we have especially a Mercury retrograde in this area of our chart, if we try to push through it and try to say, but I need to get these things done, I can't carve out even just 5 or 10 minutes to rest, it really comes back to haunt us, that decision. So it's really imperative that even now, before the Mercury retrograde period happens, you start to think about how you might carve out that time even before we get there. And Cancer. So this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 5th house of creativity, which is really nice. This brings up some review of your creative work and your work projects, especially if you have any that involve writing or editing or words of some kind. And you may find that creative collaborations from your past may reappear. And so what this means is, let's say you had a work project or a creative project in the past where you worked with another individual or a group of people. They may come back and be like, hey, how that thing we worked on together, let's do something else, or let's revisit that project. In Leo, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 4th house of home and family. And so this Mercury retrograde period is really giving you time to review your family dynamics and the environment in your home. And so this may be messages or ideas that you learned from your family of origin and how you grew up, about family roles or how family should be or what family should look like, that you may want to reevaluate or rethink during this Mercury retrograde period. You may find things that you want to change going forward, things that were done a certain way with how your family was as you were growing up. But now that you're older, you want to change them for your family now so they're different. And this also can be a time where you begin to rethink where you want to put roots down for your family. And just a caveat for that, this can be a good time for, say, dreaming of like the ideal place you want to live or your ideal home or home situation. But this isn't a good time for actually making changes in that area. I wouldn't be looking at real estate or moving right now, especially if it's something you're just now thinking of. If you thought about it ahead of time and it's been in place for a while and been a plan for a while, that's one thing. But I wouldn't make any rash changes regarding your home or your family, unless, of course, you have no choice. That's different. But this could be a good time for dreaming about what you want your home to look like and how to have your home be that nurturing sanctuary that you want it to be. And now Virgo. I'm a Virgo. Is anyone else a Virgo? I'm like taking a deep breath because I'm like, oh, this is for me. So this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 3rd house of communications. And so this is a time where kind of classic Mercury retrograde where people from your past may reappear. Old conversations may come up. And this is also, unfortunately, the area where technology troubles may really pop up. And so it's a good idea to back up all your electronic devices and your computers before Mercury retrograde begins. I know, because I'm a Virgo, I have it on my calendar to back everything up this week. And you can also have, because again, Virgo is one of the 2 signs that is ruled by Mercury, you can have a review of old writing projects or speaking projects, or something to do with research because of just because of the Mercury. There's like a double dose of Mercury when it comes to Virgo and Gemini when it's Mercury retrograde is happening. In Libra, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 2nd house of values. And so this is a good time to review your values and if your spending reflects those values. So it's a really good time to look at where your money is going and if that's where you want it to be going. And if you have a dream for saving up for a project or an item, are you backing up that dream with action and setting aside $5-10 every month to slowly build up those savings for whatever it is that you want? And this is also a good time to reassess how you talk about money and your self-worth. So I know a lot of us learned messages and kind of attitudes about money as children, and where we think money is evil, money's the root of all evil, or I can't think of all the messages right now, but you know what I'm getting at. So this is a good time to review if those messages you may have learned and inherited about money, if they reflect how you really feel about money, and also if perhaps they're mirroring how you talk about yourself and your own self-worth. And how you might find during this Mercury retrograde period that how you speak about yourself is really becoming magnified and you're a lot more aware of it. And that's just an opportunity for you to work with it and maybe reframe some of those ways you speak to and about yourself. And then Scorpio, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 1st house of identity. And this is a time where if you are a Scorpio sun or rising, you may find yourself really wanting to retreat and just pull back and not be as engaged in the world, because you're reviewing how you show up in your life and in the world. And it's a really big thing to kind of evaluate how you feel and if how you present yourself is a reflection of how you feel. And so a lot of the times when you have Mercury retrograde in this part of your chart, you kind of Marie Kondo your closet and really start to rethink if your physical body is a reflection of your inner emotional body. So and this can be everything from your hair to how you dress to how you hold yourself to how you move your body. You are reassessing if these things are a reflection of you. And so this usually involves a lot of downtime, a lot of reflection, a lot of just kind of retreating and pulling back to kind of make sure that your inner and outer worlds are a good mirror of each other. And now we have Sagittarius. So this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 12th house of spirituality. And so this is a good time to review your truth and if you were honoring it. a lot of times with Mercury retrograde in the 12th house, secrets come up, or you find that things that you've said that you thought couldn't be used against you are now being used against you. Or if you tend to gossip, that you might find you're finding out others are gossiping about you now. And this is also, I know this said this is for good for overall with this Mercury retrograde because it's in Scorpio, but especially for Sagittarius, this Mercury retrograde period is really good for therapy and digging through past hurts and past wounds and how you can work with them and how you can heal them and let them go. And when we're talking about the 12th house and Mercury retrograde, it's also just a really good time to reassess your beliefs and your spirituality and just kind of dig a little bit about what do you believe and how do you want to bring your spirituality into your daily life or daily routine. Also here you might find that you get some unexpected news or remember something suddenly out of the blue here. We have a lot, so the 12th house has a lot to do with our subconscious, and so our subconscious mind might help us pull some things out of the depth for us to work with. And now Capricorn, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 11th house of community and friendships. And so for you, this might be a good time to review your community and friend groups. You know, are the groups you engage with, are they helping you? Are they uplifting you? Do you find yourself energized when you're engaging with these groups? Or, you know, are they not quite the same? Are they not doing it for you? Is there something you need to communicate with these groups and be like, this is what I need from you? You also may find that news may surface, especially unexpected news within those community and friend groups may kind of just pop up during this Mercury retrograde period. Also, this is one of the times where it's a really good time to reconnect with old friends, and you may find that old friends and acquaintances from the past just kind of pop up to reconnect over the next few weeks. Aquarius, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 10th house of career. And so this is a time to reassess if the current career path you're on is the one you'd like to stay on. And this is a good time to prepare to make any adjustments as needed. It's kind of like with Leo and the home and family career, where I said you could think about this, but don't make any changes yet. The same thing applies here for you, Aquarius, where if you're thinking about your career and how you might want to change courses a little bit, this is a good time to think about it and dream and maybe even do some research into what you might like to change or how you could change it. But I wouldn't take any action until after Mercury goes direct, which I think is November 3rd. And even then, I would honestly wait a couple weeks. I would wait until more towards the end of November for really taking action. And then finally, Pisces, I'm sorry I put you at the end. The next time I do this, I'm going to switch it so you don't have to wait. But this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 9th house of expansion. And so for you, this is a good time to review your long-term plans, to rethink what you would like to learn about or teach to others. The 9th house has to do with learning, higher education, but also teaching. So what do you, this might be a good time to think about, what do you have a lot of knowledge or experience in that you could teach to others, that others would find valuable? And this is also a good time to reconnect with your dreams of travel or adventure. just like I just said for Aquarius, where it's a good time to think about certain things but not take action, this is a good time, Pisces, for you to dream about where you would like to travel or go, or what adventures you would like to take, or maybe dream of like a bucket list. But it's not a good time to take action on any of that. It's just a good time to kind of reflect and let yourself dream, which I know you're really good at. And so now it's time for questions, if you have any. I know I just went through a lot, and it's a lot of information. And like I said, I'm going to be sending out the slides so everyone has this and you can reference it. And yeah, I would love to know if anyone has any questions about everything we just went over. I'm going to go back. Okay. So, okay. So yeah, I mean, that's just my goal with that, was to break things down a little bit. So maybe Mercury retrograde isn't quite as scary for you, because I know there's a lot of, oh, good, I'm glad it's informative. Good, I'm glad, thank you. I mean, I know we've all seen the articles and the listicles about the things you shouldn't do during Mercury retrograde and how it's like doom and gloom and very scary. And like I said, in a way that is part of it, but that's only a little bit of the information. And I think looking at Mercury retrograde this way and how it may be impacting each sign is a little bit more helpful. It gives you, again, going back to the card I pulled at the beginning, it gives you a little bit more focus. This is the focus card of where to direct your energy. And when I send out the slides later today, one thing that you may find useful is, especially when you're talking about focusing and where you might want to focus your energy for this upcoming retrograde, is looking at both your sun and your rising for those slides that I shared, and what houses they kind of involve. So for me, I am a Virgo sun and Scorpio rising. And so Virgo, that's my house of communication, and Scorpio, that's my house of identity. And so for me, I can combine those two and see that this Mercury retrograde will probably bring up themes around how I communicate to others, how I get my message across, conversations from the past, redoing conversations, redoing writing or teaching, kind of editing, research things, and also more of that Scorpio. Does my outward appearance reflect how I feel inside? And for me personally, I'm already feeling it. Where I'm already kind of feeling that Scorpio first house wanting to retreat and kind of reflect energy. So Jessica, where can you find out your sun and rising? So my suggestion is, and hold on, I'll pull it up for you. So I'm putting it into the chat. So that link is probably one of my favorites for finding out your sun and rising sign. For your rising sign, you will need to know the time of your birth. I mean, you just need to. I mean, there are some people who will go and work backwards with information that you have. I mean, And you can kind of, if you don't know the exact time of your birth, you can, but if you know some other things about when you were born, you can get a pretty good guess. So for example, I know what TV show was on air when I, like, literally when I was born. And so I could go and just do a quick Google search for the day and time I was born, knowing what show was on to figure out approximately what time I was born. And so there are tricks like that if you don't know the exact time of your birth, that you can work with an astrologer to kind of work backwards and figure it out. But the reason you need to know the time of your birth, especially for your rising sign, is because it's unlike the sun, which, you know, you can figure out your sun sign pretty easily, not knowing the time of your birth, unless you're right on the cusp. Because the sun stays, because the sun stays in a sign for a month. But when you get more like to the moon and your rising, which changes, I mean, the moon sign changes every 2.5 to 3 days. And your rising sign, I can't remember how often it changes off the top of my head, but it's pretty quickly. So it gets pretty complicated if you're trying to work backwards and put all these pieces together. Let's see. Does anyone else have any other questions? I hope this was helpful and helped make Mercury retrograde a little bit less scary. So the only other thing is part of what I will be sending you later is, and you might, if you have done any Mercury retrograde work with me before, you might already have these, but when I send the recording and slides out later today, I will also be sending everyone my principal Mercury retrograde oracle cards. And I'm looking on my desk right now to see if I have. I do. Okay. And so these are cards that so when you print them out, they're all like on a sheet of paper. And what I've done with these, so there's a front and a back side, and you can cut them out and you can just use them as is, but I've laminated mine so they're more durable and my son can throw them around and I don't have to worry about them. But these are some of messages that are pretty common that come up during Mercury retrograde that you might find is a little bit easier to tap into with the cards, because it just helps you kind of access that, you know, some conscious level a little bit more. So they have messages like share your voice. This one says step back and revisit. Take time to ground. Take time to review. Trust your magic. And so they're really just really short, sweet, pretty self-explanatory messages that I think are really good for Mercury retrograde and tapping into this time period of review and reflection. And one of the things I like to remember about Mercury retrograde especially is it happens 3 to 4 times a year. So depending on when it happens, it happens basically once a season, once a quarter. And so it's a really actually nice kind of breakup of time where once a quarter you just take 2 or 3 weeks out to step back and review and reflect and kind of give yourself this framework for reassessing, reevaluating, whatever is coming up for you in your life that you need a little extra time and space with. And so I will be sending all that out to everyone in a couple of hours. And otherwise, I hope this was really informative for everyone. And just stay tuned, because I'm hoping to have another free webinar in a couple of weeks where I already have some ideas where I'd really like to chat about, if you're like me and have been maybe dreading the upcoming winter season and what you're going to do with yourself because you already feel like you've been in a very long winter because maybe you've been quarantining. So I thought it might be really nice to have a webinar looking at the astrology of as we go deeper into the fall and into the winter, and how we can use that astrology to kind of create a framework for our self-care. So maybe this winter doesn't feel as heavy, because I know a lot of us and a lot of people I've been talking to right now are really already feeling the kind of looming heavy winter. Oh, good. I'm glad you're loving your autumn moon journal. So, I hope everyone loved today, and I loved being here and chatting with you. And I will be sending everything out to you within a couple of hours. And thank you so much for being here. All right. Have a good day. Bye.